You're listening to Cattails, the podcast of SLC Faculty Local 417, your union connection. Each episode, we bring you real stories from our members, practical tips on your rights, and the kind of information that helps us all move forward.
Welcome back to Cattails. I'm your host, Julie White. Today's show, we want to talk more about what's happening behind the scenes with the merger, because behind the polished press releases from the colleges and the town hall slide decks lies an emotional and operational reality that is far more turbulent. As you know, this past April, leadership at St. Lawrence College and Fleming College announced a historic move, the first integration of public colleges as equal partners in Ontario, with a hard target of April 1st, 2027. We've been told it's about expanding programs, optimizing systems, and scaling services. What does it actually feel like on the ground, and what do the college's own documents reveal and hide about this transition? Today, we're diving deep into the 2026-27 business plans and the board-audited financial statements of St. Lawrence. And we're joined by two leaders who represent the workers caught in the middle of this unmapped storm. I'm joined today by Gillian Axten, president of OPSEU Local 417, representing faculty, and Amanda Shaw, president of OPSEU Local 418, representing support staff. Thank you both for being here. Let's start with the emotional reality. You both represent workers who found out about this massive merger with almost no notice, no consultation, and certainly no roadmap. What has this past year actually felt like for your members?
Members just seem to have been thrust into continuous feelings of instability and stress and frustration. So obviously we've had two kind of rough years when we had the layoffs, and now moving into this piece and the announcement of the merger, because we have a lot of people who work for St. Lawrence College who graduated from St. Lawrence College, who had children who graduated from St. Lawrence College. And there is also a really big loyalty or tie to the name St. Lawrence College and what the school has represented in the past. And I think that now people are just worried. They're worried if they're going to have a job. They're worried if their pay is going to get impacted. And I'll get into why later. And now we're in another situation where there's news of stuff coming, but no communication on how that's going to impact people, no communication on how that's going to impact jobs, conflicting messages on what the potential impacts are. And now people just they don't know kind of what to do about it.
On the academic and faculty side, the experience was remarkably similar, and the timing of the announcement couldn't have been more disruptive. Gillian, how did faculty find out, and what are they facing?
It's very similar on the faculty side. We found out about the merger while we were at the OPSEU convention. And since then, information has come out in dribs and drabs, but really nobody is telling us what it means, what it will look like, how we're going to be impacted. So we just had our first large rounds of layoffs. We had 30 plus people laid off, plus a bunch of involuntary transfers. And now everybody's wondering, what does a year from now look like? Where are we keeping all our programs? And if we are, what does that mean? What changes and how does it change?
There's a massive alarming disconnect between what the college is saying publicly and what's written in the legal, audited documents signed off by the Board of Governors. Every year on June 30th, the colleges are required by legislation to post their annual business plans. These plans are supposed to outline their strategies for the upcoming year. But when you open St. Lawrence College's 2026-27 business plan, it treats the entire merger as a strategic initiative and a partnership of equals. It uses words like integration and mapping our future, but these are the words that are only in the introductory pages. But here's what it doesn't say. It never mentions the word dissolution. It doesn't mention that on April 1st, 2027, SLC will legally cease to exist. It doesn't talk about employee transfers, program rationalization, or winding down operations. But if you look at the audited financial statements, the legal truth is laid bare in the footnotes. SLC is scheduled for legal dissolution. Gillian, from a faculty perspective, what does it mean operationally when a college is planning as if it's going to continue independently while legally preparing to cease to exist?
So what does it mean? I have no idea what anything means anymore. First off, they're not telling us anything. So let's be really clear. The local, mine, Amanda's, we have no idea of what's going on. And I hazard to guess that a lot of middle management doesn't know anything more than we do. So that's the first thing members need to understand is we're clueless. What does it mean? In Glenn's presentation, he talked about an overarching umbrella that was supposed to be, there regardless of how St. Lawrence and Fleming were to move. We were going to become one, we were going to merge, but nothing really substantive was going to change, including our names. But then when we look at the use of dissolution within the audited financial statement, that becomes, let's go with less than true, or at least the language is not used in the same way. So what does it mean to be gone as SLC? I personally made that assumption the moment a merger was stated, that we would no longer be SLC. We would be, I don't know, St. Fleming or St. Florence or something else, but we're not going to be St. Lawrence College anymore.
Amanda, same question for support staff. What does it mean operationally when a college plans for a future that it won't have?
Well, I mean, there are concerns from multiple angles, right? Again, I speak to what positions will exist, what will that look like, the blending of union locals, the blending of jobs and departments and procedures and information systems like PeopleSoft and all of these things. People are really concerned about it, but we don't seem to be talking about any of it. So, which is in and of itself a stressor and in and of itself something that is causing a lot of anxiety for staff because we don't want April 1st to come and everyone just kind of like suddenly we're this new college and nothing fits or works together and how many years that will take to get everything aligned. And nobody's talking about it. And when we have stuff like that going on, even on a smaller level, like if the merger wasn't happening and that was happening just to SLC on its own when we were changing systems, it causes great anxiety. And my experience has been that the way to handle that anxiety is a clear, concise, and consistent message. And what these business plans, the most recent posted business plans and audited financial statements have done is show a very inconsistent and inconcise message about what's happening. And I don't know how they want or expect buy-in from staff about what's happening when support staff and faculty alike aren't being consulted about what's happening, aren't being consulted about the processes, aren't being involved, and then are getting completely mixed messages and scary words are being thrown around now like dissolution. Marcia Steves, the president of Local 51, and I have been calling it St. Florence for months now and have really amped up communication between each other because if this is happening, we're all going to need to be part of a team. And yet it seems like a missed opportunity for the college to not be involving the local leaders, the support staff members, and other people like middle management in those conversations to the degree that they should be involved to ensure a smooth transition.
Now, I haven't read or I haven't been as up to date on the legislation if a new college is to be created. So if our colleges are to be dissolved and a new organization is created, could they try to have an organization that's not unionized?
The legislation isn't completed yet, but I'm not sure. I don't think they could because our collective agreements for all parties, there are, the support full-time, support part-time, faculty full-time, and then they're working on your faculty part-time right now. They all speak one of the 24 colleges and are all unionized. So I don't think that they'd be able to remove the unionization of this newly formed college, whatever they choose to name it.
And we do have language in our collective agreement, as much as it's old, that talks about how to do a merger. Not that the college is actually abiding by that language within the collective agreement, but there is language. So I can't see them skirting it that much because this is contemplated within the collective agreement. But it does
But if
have
it's not
to.
technically a merger,
And that's the question, right? Because it's not really a merger necessarily. The way that Glenn presented it, as Gillian spoke about, sounded like it would be kind of more like a merger. But when the audited financial statements say that the college will cease to exist and a newly formed college, is it really a merger?
Good question. And I think in order to continue with the programming as we have it set up and to be a public college, I think it would have to fall underneath a union and continue to be an OPSEU union. I can't fathom that the new college would suddenly not be offering publicly funded programs and fall under the CAAT umbrella. If they dissolved St. Lawrence College and it became a private career college, then sure, all bets are off. But I don't think that's the intent, or at least I certainly hope not.
okay, interesting. So let's get back to talking about that scary word, dissolution. As we noted, buried deep in the notes of the Board of Governors' financial statements is the explicit admission the college is expected to be dissolved once its assets are transferred to the new entity. Amanda, you've spoken about how reading that word felt like a physical blow. Tell us what went through your mind when you saw the legal reality on paper and what it means for the communities we serve.
As a person who works on one of the smaller campuses, who has felt for years like Kingston is the epicenter of the universe, I realize that might be an unpopular opinion, but let's be real. I worry for the smaller campuses. I worry for our members as a whole, but I worry for the smaller campuses like Brockville and Cornwall and Fleming's, Halliburton and Lindsay campuses and what that is going to look like for people. I worry for jobs, and I understand that there are financial pressures and that those need to be addressed, and we need to find creative ways to do it now that the international student caps are what they are and the impacts that it's had on the system. But ultimately, when it says that St. Lawrence College isn't going to exist and has been completely dissolved, all thoughts of merger go out of my head. And that is just a stress response, right? Because when I see that word, it felt like a gut punch. And it felt like, my gosh, even though logically, despite what Glenn has been saying in the town halls, the writing's on the wall for that to be what it looks like. And maybe by dissolution, it really only means because they're, as we've been saying, merging the assets and all of those different pieces. And maybe that's the case. It's just, it was a really black and white way to kind of put what's happening. And having read the business plan prior to the audited financial statements, I wasn't expecting that. It's a weird thing to consider that St. Lawrence College won't exist because as in our three communities, it has been such a pillar and such a haven for people and for education, not just education. Like we've done like seniors programming and programming for youth programs. And you look at the dual credit programs and people who want to get back to school. And when you hear the word dissolved, it also makes you worry about the community impacts and those lasting community impacts and barriers to post-secondary education. And if we don't exist anymore.
And Gillian, when you see that language in the financial statement and not in the business plan, not in the strategic plan, not in public communications, what does that tell you?
I see it very much from sort of a more accounting-based ideology. In order for a new college to be created, St. Fleming, then the old one has to vanish. Do I think it's going to impact jobs? For sure. Do I know if it's going to impact our campuses? I don't know. I've been fearful for the two smaller campuses since Glenn opened his mouth and said the only colleges that are going to survive financially are those that only have one campus. That rang giant alarm bells. So the dissolution wordage didn't freak me out as much simply because I think it's probably hopefully more of an accounting phraseology in order to have the creation of a new formation of college.
And this brings us to the operational contradiction. St. Lawrence's business plan outlines massive multi-year digital transformation project, AI policy deployment, cybersecurity frameworks, and student experience redesigns. But a merger requires one student information system, one HR portal, one payroll system, and one unified IT structure. Why is St. Lawrence investing heavily in independent systems while preparing to hand over its assets in less than a year? Gillian, is there an actual transition plan in place, or are these digital overhauls serving a different purpose?
There is no plan. And to be honest, it's one of the conversations I had with Glenn, 2 years ago when they first announced that there would be layoffs, or there were layoffs. I think was just after the support staff massive layoff, and when Cornwall and Brockville got designated as learning centers, I asked him flat out, "What's the plan, Glenn? Like, tell me what the plan is. Do you have a plan? Like, lead, follow, or get the f out of the way." So when I asked him that, he looked me straight in the face and he says, "I don't know. I don't know what the plan is." So I'm hoping in the near 2 years since then, he's come up with a plan. But if he has, he needs to start reading us all into this plan. They can't run this business without us. We're not selling widgets here. We are, all of us, support staff, faculty, everybody who works at the college deals with people. And we need to understand where we're going and what we're doing to be able to support our students through the future.
Amanda, what's your take on these parallel digital overhauls? Is it a responsible use of resources in a year with a severe financial deficit?
It feels to me like a waste of resources and money when we're talking about needing to tighten our belts and that, we're out of funding and we have to redesign how we're doing things. That's great. Except as of April 1st, SLC ceases to exist as an individual institution. And this is where that communication piece comes in, because cybersecurity would be the only piece where I think that the cybersecurity piece is really important, just because we've seen so many different companies subject to hacks and who have had their operations impacted for months on end. But for me, if April 1st is the target, why isn't our focus on doing the job that we're currently doing well, updating things like courses and making sure that our courses for the programs that we are keeping are where they need to be, making sure that our support staff PDFs are accurate and rated appropriately in the event that there are negative impacts, and keeping all of that stuff going while we start looking at where the synergies are and where they're not and what needs to happen between now and April 1st. So, or is it just that we're going to continuing to act like one college until April 1st, and then all of a sudden we're going to then start all that work later? Because I feel like that would almost be worse.
There's also a quiet strategy at play here. When you read St. Lawrence's digital priorities alongside the ministry directed efficiency and accountability fund review, a pattern begins to emerge. Gillian, how do these academic and technology priorities tie into the actual mechanics of a merger?
I think we need to look at the business plan and the efficiency audit. I think we need to look at those in tandem, because I think they, in many ways, are saying a similar thing, which is we need digital transformation in order to be able to offer more courses online or hybrid or high flex, so we can put more virtual bums in seats without increasing the number of physical seats. So we don't have to increase the number of teachers or the space. We can just have them virtually attend courses. And we're starting to see that this year. And I think the move will be to capture that style of teaching with Fleming. So we are preparing to start offering more to more people without actually having to increase the number of faculty, potentially actually decreasing the number of faculty. Because if we can offer a communications course with 275 students in it, when are we going to be able to offer a gen ed with 500, reducing the number of at least part-time and partial load faculty? So I see this whole digital transformation as very indicative of prepping for merger.
So the work is being done, but it's being packaged as solo modernization to avoid discussing the reality of a merged entity.
They're not talking merger. They don't, don't look here while something else is happening behind the scenes. I think there's a closed door group that know what needs to happen, and they're going to shove it down our throats all of a sudden. The problem that occurs, and Amanda, I'm sure, sees it every day, is the management, the college, really doesn't know what our jobs are. And so when they decide to reduce staff or change things without consultation, then there's these huge gaps in service and in understanding, because people don't really understand what we do for a living. And because of that, they make choices that are absolutely asinine.
We've already seen the fallout of these closed door decisions during the major layoffs of February 2025. Amanda, how did that play out? And what does it tell us about the current merger planning?
We saw a lot of that through the layoffs, because obviously the decisions for the layoffs that occurred in February 2025 made by a very small group of people and did not include middle management, because middle managers were also getting impacted. And once the meetings had happened and the impacts came out to the support staff and the management at the time, when the managers who then were given the portfolios that were left from managers who'd been impacted, all of a sudden, those managers had to start advocating for the number of support staff, going, well, we can't do it with that many people. And that's not even having all of that information. And it was actually kind of scary, because as union leaders, we can only do so much. We can give them as much information as we possibly can, but they are the ones who make those decisions ultimately. And all we can do is help our members kind of manage the fallout from those decisions and help people move forward and try to push back and fight with what we can. But it was really, really evident when those layoffs happened that the people who were entrusted with making the decisions really didn't have an idea of what we were doing. But making decisions and implementing processes without consultation has been a thing that's happened forever. It's been happening years and years and years, because there are all these conversations. But the bigger thing that I'm worried about is, let's say that there is a working group and they're sitting behind this room preparing to make decisions about what's going to happen. Who in that room has the authority to say, I've heard what everybody has said, and this is how we're going to proceed? Because I've been at a lot of tables throughout my 16 years at St. Lawrence College where no decision ever seemed to come, because nobody in that room was tasked with being that final voice when multiple people at the table were at odds with what should happen, or there was a difference of opinion of it. And it worries me greatly. So I'm hoping that there's somebody.
Do you have anything to add to that, Gillian?
I guess the old adage, management has a right to manage, even if they manage badly. And when you give all of the decision making to a very, very small group of people, and you don't consult the people actually doing the work, those decisions are often bad.
And bad decisions lead to immense anxiety. In St. Lawrence College's official business plan, under the pillar of our people, there's a stated objective to, quote, increase stability in our workforce. But the financials show a $6.1 million operating deficit and a $12 million drop in cash for last year. And the college is projecting an $18.2 million deficit for this fiscal year. Layoffs and program suspensions are already happening. Amanda, how do members react when they read about workforce stability in a plan that refuses to acknowledge the merger?
They don't feel like our workforce is stable. Early on, after the merger announcement, some members got a hold of Fleming's seniority list, because Fleming previously had it posted publicly, and people were doing direct comparisons to pay bands, to the number of people on a particular team, and compared it with our pay bands and our similar teams and the staffing levels there. And we're making a lot of assumptions, because when answers aren't coming, people will fill in the gaps, and they will look and they will attempt to find the information themselves. And people just are not feeling secure at all. People are trying to do the best that they can for the students and that experience, because I've said this before, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who would want the students negatively impacted in any way, shape, or form. And they work really hard to make sure that it's kind of that status quo thing. But people's stress levels are definitely high and they're bracing for layoffs. Even though Glenn said we'll need more staff, not less, in the previous town hall.
I think the whole idea of workplace stability is a fantasy, and I don't even have an idea of how they can say that in a business plan and do what they're doing. We worked incredibly hard on CESC this year to try to keep the most stability possible we can. And even with that, we still had layoffs. I can't even imagine what it's going to be when we start merging seniority lists and how that'll all work out. I get asked regularly, what does this mean to my job in Cornwall, Brockville, Kingston? And no idea. Putting it in that they're going to work towards more, stable employment, work towards great. When? In 2045? Because I don't see stability coming anytime soon.
The business plans ignore the biggest institutional change in our college's histories. But April 1st is coming fast. What do workers urgently need right now, and what protections are available to them under our collective agreements? Gillian, you've pointed out that there are concrete mechanisms designed specifically for this.
So, first thing, the collective agreement does talk about this, and there is a task force that should have been, from my perspective, set up, April, May latest, which involve, faculty union, support staff union, both from Fleming, St. Lawrence, and we'll call it St. Fleming, as well as management, where we can sit, discuss, and work collaboratively in trying to figure this out. Maybe a merger is the only way of financially keeping us afloat. Okay, I'm not an accountant, but maybe. So if that's the case, then we need to work together to be able to get that done. To deny the task force is, to me, saying we're going to do this and you're just going to have to suck it up and suffer the consequences. Or worse yet, we don't know what we're doing. We'll let you know when we figure it out. And that's even more terrifying.
The union's joint submitted a formal letter requesting details, records, and the launch of this task force. What's the response been from labor relations and college leadership?
We get nothing.
Nothing at all.
Okay, so still nothing other than labor relations responding to say, yes, we've received your letter.
And I feel like it included something that said, we'll loop in the union when appropriate or something along that vein. And I kind of think appropriate would have been 2 months ago.
Actually, appropriate would have been a year ago when they first started contemplating this, because I can't imagine this was all written, done, and thought of in April of this year. But okay, so let's pretend that maybe, January would have been a good time to start talking to us about this.
Glenn said at the last town hall, and it really stuck with me. He's like, at the end of the day, it's like, none of you should be surprised. I've been talking about it for 2 years. And when he, quote unquote, was speaking about it for 2 years, it was coming across as almost like jokes about us getting sucked into Algonquin, not this. So it just stuck with me.
What this has all led me to believe and feel more in depth than ever before is a lack of trust. Amanda talked eloquently about, we're filling in the blanks. When there's a lack of information, you fill it in. For me, when there's a lack of information, I mistrust all the information being said. Glenn said we should have known this was coming because he's been talking about it for 2 years. If you wanted us to talk about it, then you should have told us, or it's going to be you're going to say something covertly and assume that the population will understand it. That's not a good communication style. And so when he says something like the only colleges that are making money are the ones with one campus, when does that happen? When do we become a college with one campus? Because obviously we were supposed to have known 2 years ago that we were supposed to merge. These are frightening things, and I don't trust them because of it.
If internal communication is a brick wall, the fight must move outside the college walls. For a merger of this scale to legally occur, the provincial government must pass new legislation. The Ontario legislature is recessed until October 26th. With municipal elections happening right now, is this the moment to take this issue directly to our communities, our local candidates, and the province?
I think that's where we have power. Yeah, I think that's really where we have power. We've seen that local power used at Brockville years and years ago when there was talk about closing that campus, and the municipality got heavily involved because they didn't want to lose their campus because it's so important to their population. I think we need to have all municipal councillors who are potentially up for election make a statement about this and be willing to go and fight to retain the campuses and retain the college. Our small rural communities need our community colleges for all sorts of reasons. And Amanda talked about that at the beginning. So it's not just for our great programs, but it's for the high school students, for the seniors, for a community space. All of those things need to be had. And the moment there's a threat to close it, I think the municipalities should be just screaming.
I agree with Gillian. And I think it's interesting because we talk a lot within the college about helping students overcome barriers to education, but yet with the merger, and we've seen the closure of some other smaller campuses for other colleges as a part of the fallout from the international student situation. We need to remember that financial burden is one of the biggest barriers to education, and not everybody can afford to move away to go to school. And our community colleges, Lawrence College and all of the other 23 colleges plus us, they are all supposed to be serving the communities. And I think that the community should have a say and should get involved and should be advocating for keeping the campuses open in the smaller communities and speaking about how necessary it is, because I find it really interesting that there's a group in Cornwall that has been and continues to fight for university presence in Cornwall. And yet on the flip side, we're talking about this merger and the fears that the Cornwall campus could potentially be one of the casualties of this merger. Because, Gillian referenced the efficiency audit reports, and it does suggest in the efficiency audit reports the closure of the two smaller campuses if something doesn't change with those financial positions. It's in there.
Okay. So just putting it out there, when municipal candidate hopefuls come knocking on our doors, we need to be prepared to talk to them about the colleges. And yes, they are funded through the province, but the municipalities certainly have a lot of sway and can certainly put pressure on our members of provincial parliament. And there's heavy irony in who holds the keys in this legislative process. Nolan Quinn, the MPP for SDG, is expected to table the legislation for the new college this fall.
And as we know, Nolan Quinn is St. Lawrence College graduate, Cornwall campus, which always I find ironic that, the grad of a program that no longer exists on the Cornwall campus. And every time I get a chance to talk to him, I always remind him of that. If he doesn't support the smaller campuses, he would have never been where he is.
And as we head toward April 1st, 2027, the message from our union leadership is clear. We cannot fight this fight alone, and we cannot afford to wait and see what happens behind closed doors. Amanda, what's your closing message to our members and the community?
I think for me, it's just, I'm hoping that people will get really comfortable asking questions at these tables when they do have town halls and various meetings, or sending things to Our Way Forward. Ask the questions, submit the privacy office requests, speak with your municipalities, because we can't do it alone. We can't fight this fight, just the three of us in this room and our additional LECs. It's going to take everybody to help.
And Gillian, your final thoughts?
We need boots on the grounds. We need people talking about this. We need to understand and have people understand the impact for their jobs, for their community, for their children, for their grandchildren. What's going to happen in the next year is going to change potentially everything within our communities. So if they don't stand up and have a say, then they're just going to have to take whatever decision comes along. And most of us may not want to stand up and be forceful in our voices, but then we also don't want to take what's going to come down the line. So it's a matter of pick your poison at this point. I prefer to have control or try to exert what little control I can and push. At least then I'd have a right to complain if I don't get it the way I want it. If you're not willing to stand up and say something, well, then you're just going to get what you get.
And at this point, the merger hasn't happened. Certainly, the processes are in place. Um, I don't want to talk about whether or not we have an option of stopping it because I don't even think that that's a conversation right now. But certainly being involved and being part of the discussion at the table, that's really what we're focusing on, and making sure our campuses are strong and our communities are strong.
Absolutely. Because again, as Gillian said, we're the experts in our jobs and our processes. And if people feel like they're having conversations and their opinions are being genuinely heard and considered, then they tend to be more okay with the outcome, even if they don't get what they want.
This is Communications 101. When you don't consult the experts on the ground, systems break, communities suffer, and trust is shattered. But when we stand together, we have the power to protect our jobs, our programs, and our campuses. Thank you for listening to this special episode of Cat Tales. If you have any questions or want to get involved, please reach out.
And now, the 411 on the 417.
Before we wrap up, a quick 411 on the 417. We featured Greg Dixon, Vice Chair and Secretary of the CAAT part-time and sessional bargaining team, regularly on our part-time and all-in segment, helping keep members informed about what's happening at the bargaining table. And we'll have Greg back on an upcoming episode for another bargaining update. But there's something important that you don't have to wait for that podcast to do. The bargaining team is encouraging all part-time and sessional members to attend one of the 2 virtual town halls taking place on August 19th or August 20th. These sessions will happen immediately following the next round of bargaining and will provide important updates on proposals being brought to the table and what they can mean for our members. The bargaining team has identified this as a critical moment in negotiations, and they're asking members to stay informed, get engaged, and be part of the conversation. So if you're part-time or sessional, or if you've been partial load and find yourself with part-time hours come the fall, please make sure that you're planning to attend. The town halls take place August 19th at 7 p.m. or August 20th at noon, and we'll be sharing registration details through our usual communication channels. An informed membership is a stronger membership. And keep an ear out for our upcoming conversation with Greg Dixon, where we'll dive deeper into what's happening at the bargaining table and what members need to know.
You've been listening to Cat Tales, stories that matter to faculty and beyond. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Visit slcfaculty.ca and stay connected with us on social media.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policies, positions, or statements of OPSEU, CEFCO, St. Lawrence College, or any affiliated organizations. This podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only. While every effort is made to ensure accuracy, SLC Faculty Local 417 makes no representations or warranties of any kind, express or implied, about the completeness, reliability, or suitability of the information shared. Any reliance placed on such information is strictly at the listener's own risk. Music and sound effects used in this podcast are licensed or royalty-free. We respect copyright law and encourage our listeners do the same.